My name is Jacob Blake. I'm 30 years old, and I live alone in an old wooden house in Sacramento, California. Tonight is Christmas Eve, and while most people are surrounded by family, laughter, and the warm clinking of glasses at the dinner table, I'm sitting here in silence, staring at three empty chairs. I spent the whole afternoon preparing a simple meal: turkey with mashed potatoes, a small salad, and a bottle of cheap wine from the supermarket. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just enough to remind me of the holidays when my family used to sit around this same table. I set the plates carefully, hoping, maybe foolishly, that someone might show up. But deep down, I already knew the truth. No one was coming. This wasn't the first time. For years, I had tried. Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, I always extended an invitation, always called, always tried to keep some connection alive. And every year the answer was the same. We're busy, Jacob. Maybe next time. That next time never came. Still, there was a part of me that couldn't let go of hope. Maybe my mother would surprise me by knocking on the door with her famous smile. Maybe my father would walk in, booming voice filling the hallway. Maybe Luke, my younger brother, would finally remember that I exist. But the clock ticked past 7, then 8, and the only sound in the house was the creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet. I sat at the table and poured myself a glass of wine. The twinkling lights of the small Christmas tree in the corner flickered weakly, but instead of bringing joy, they seemed to make the silence heavier. I scrolled through my phone, pretending it didn't matter, but I couldn't ignore the photos flooding my feed. There they were, my parents and Luke, smiling in front of a massive tree in their Miami mansion. They were dressed in elegant clothes, surrounded by strangers who looked just tears polished, holding glasses of champagne. Their table overflowed with dishes so fancy I couldn't even name half of them. And yet in all those photos, in all that celebration, there wasn't a single mention of me. No call, no text, no, not even a simple, "Merry Christmas, Jacob." I turned off my phone, the bitterness in my chest rising like a knot I couldn't swallow. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was used to it. But the truth was, it hurt more each year. It wasn't just about missing Christmas dinner. It was about being forgotten, as though I had never been part of their story at all. I looked around the table again, at the 3 empty seats. In my mind, I could still see them filled. My mother chatting endlessly about her new jewelry, my father exaggerating his business successes, Luke laughing too loudly at his own jokes. Even if I never quite fit in with them, at least I was there. At least I wasn't invisible. Now I was invisible, and the loneliness felt sharper than ever. I lifted my glass and forced a weak smile, whispering to the photograph of my grandfather hanging on the wall. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa. At least you never forgot me." Then I took a sip of the cheap wine and let the silence settle back in, knowing this Christmas would be no different from the rest. Growing up, I always knew my family was different from me. My parents, Martin and Janet Blake, loved to put on a show for the world. My father, tall with a booming voice, had a way of making himself sound more important than he was. He wore expensive suits, even when I knew he could barely afford them, and strutted through the neighborhood like a man who had everything under control. My mother, on the other hand, was obsessed with appearances, designer handbags, social gatherings, photographs staged to perfection for social media. She lived for the spotlight, even if it was built on illusion. Then there was Luke, my younger brother. He seemed to inherit their love of flash and flare. While I was the older one, the one who played things safe, Luke was bold, reckless, and endlessly admired by my parents. He always had the latest car, the newest phone, the confidence to walk into any room and act like he owned it. My parents called him ambitious. To me, it looked more like arrogance. And me? I was the odd one out. I didn't see the point in buying a suit I couldn't afford or a car I didn't need. I was happiest in an old t-shirt and sneakers with a cup of black coffee to start my day. Simplicity wasn't just a choice. It was who I was. but to my family, it was a flaw. They never said it outright, but their glances and their jokes made it clear. I remember family gatherings, birthdays, or weekend dinners in the living room of the house I still live in. My father would raise a glass, bragging about the deals he was about to close. My mother would parade her new jewelry or talk about the vacation she was planning. Luke would brag about late-night parties with his wealthy friends, laughing as if the whole world was his playground. And me? I'd sit quietly, trying not to draw attention while they treated me like an outsider in my own home. "Jacob, why are you always so quiet?" Luca once teased, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are you too busy counting how much money you save by not buying good wine?" Everyone laughed. My father even patted him on the back like it was some clever punchline. My mother smiled faintly but didn't defend me. I forced a smile, even though inside it felt like someone had punched me in the chest. It didn't stop at jokes. The difference seeped into everything. When I graduated college with a finance degree, I chose to work at a stable insurance company. The salary wasn't flashy, but it was steady, and I was proud of earning my own way. Meanwhile, Luke dropped out of college, borrowed money from our parents, and started a business that failed within a year. I thought he'd face the consequences, but instead, my parents praised him for being driven. They looked at me with disappointment and said, "Jacob, if only you had your brother's ambition." I'll never forget how that stung. I was the one who paid bills on time, who never caused them worry, who worked honestly. Yet to them, I was a failure, simply because I didn't live the way they wanted. No fancy car, no expensive house, no pictures to show off online. Just Jacob living small, unnoticed. The irony was I didn't need their approval, or at least I told myself I didn't. I wanted peace, stability, a life that made sense to me. But when the people closest to you make you feel like you're not enough, the wound cuts deeper than you expect. Over time, I began to realize I didn't just feel different. I was different. My family thrived on pretending to be wealthier, happier, more glamorous than they were. I never wanted that life. I only wanted something real. But as much as I tried to brush it off, the truth was unavoidable. In a family built on appearances, I was the one thing they didn't know how to show off, and so they pushed me further and further into the shadows. If there was one person who ever made me feel like I belonged, it was my grandfather, William Blake. He was nothing like my parents or Luke. While they chased after wealth and status, he lived with a kind of simplicity that most people today wouldn't understand. He wore old flannel shirts, worked with his hands, and brewed the cheapest supermarket coffee you could find. Yet he carried himself with more dignity than anyone I've ever known. I used to sit with him on the porch of this very house, the same creaky bench still resting outside. We'd sit there for hours, sipping coffee while he told me stories from his youth. He had worked in a lumber mill when he was young, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor. There was nothing glamorous about his life, but he spoke of it with pride. To him, hard work and honesty mattered more than anything else. "Jacob," he used to say, patting my shoulder with a steady hand, "don't waste your life trying to be someone else. Flashiness is just a shell. Integrity, that's the core. If you live true to yourself, you'll never go wrong." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. I was too young, too caught up in comparing myself to Luke, too desperate for my parents' approval. But every time he said those words, I felt stronger. It was as if he was sharing a secret only I was meant to carry, a reminder that I wasn't as invisible as I thought. He had this way of cutting through the noise of life. While my parents bragged about business deals or my mother flaunted her newest purchase, my grandfather would quietly sip his coffee and give me a look that said, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." That look, that unspoken understanding carried me through some of the loneliest days of my youth. He often told me that money was dangerous if you didn't respect it. "Money doesn't make the man, Jacob," he'd say in his low, steady voice. "But it can destroy those who don't know its value." I didn't realize how prophetic those words would become, not until years later. At the time, I simply nodded, storing every word like it was a treasure. One moment that has never left me was the day he looked me straight in the eye and said, "One day you'll have something of your own. Don't be afraid of being left behind. You're stronger than you think." I remember smiling, brushing it off as encouragement. But now, looking back, I realize he was telling me something much deeper. Something I wouldn't understand until long after he was gone. He passed, 5 years ago on a quiet autumn afternoon. I sat by his bedside, holding his frail hand as he whispered his final words to me. "Jacob, hold on to who you are. Don't let anyone take that from you." Then he was gone. Just like that, the only person who ever truly saw me for who I was had left this world. His death changed everything. Within months, my parents and Luke were suddenly wealthy, moving to a mansion in Miami and leaving Sacramento behind. But me, I stayed in the old house, clinging to the memories of my grandfather, because it was the only place where I still felt connected to him. Even now, when I sit alone in the evenings, I can almost hear his voice. I can almost see him on that bench, sipping his cheap coffee, telling me that I don't need to chase anyone else's dreams. That wisdom has become the compass I live by. And though I didn't know it then, his lessons, and a secret he left behind, would one day change the course of my life. After my grandfather passed, the house felt unbearably quiet. I thought losing him would pull my family closer together, but instead, it was as if he had been the last thread holding us in place. Just a few months later, everything changed, though not in the way I expected. My parents and Luke suddenly became wealthy, almost overnight. One moment, they were still living in this old Sacramento house with its creaky floors and faded walls, and the next, they were posting photos from a mansion in Miami. A sprawling white estate with palm trees lining the driveway, luxury cars gleaming in the sun, and parties filled with strangers in elegant clothes. Their social media feeds transformed into glossy showcases of a life I couldn't even imagine. Trips to Paris, Dubai, and islands I'd only seen in magazines. My mother flaunted designer handbags and jewelry. My father posed with expensive cigars and glasses of champagne, riding captiemisi ons about business victories. Luca posted photos of himself behind the wheel of a red sports car, grinning like he owned the world. And me? I was never invited, not once. I remember the first time I called my mother after they moved. "Mom, are you coming back for Christmas this year?" I asked, my voice hopeful. Her tone was gentle, but it carried a distance that stung more than any outright rejection. "Oh, Jacob, I'm so busy. Your father has a big party here in Miami. Maybe next time, okay?" That next time never came. Luke stopped answering my texts altogether. And when I sent small gifts, knitted scarves, books, or little things I thought they might appreciate, they were never acknowledged. It was as though I had been erased, replaced by the glamorous world they now lived in. At first, I tried not to question it. I told myself they deserved to be happy, that maybe they had gotten lucky with investments or business opportunities. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Their sudden wealth was too sharp, too immediate, as if it had appeared from thin air. Whenever I asked my father, he brushed me off. "Business luck," he said with a practiced smile. "You wouldn't understand." When I tried asking Luke, he laughed and said, "Don't worry about it, Jacob. Just keep living your boring little life." It wasn't jealousy that gnawed at me. I wasn't angry that they had money. What hurt was the way they had left me behind, as if I were an embarrassment to their new lives. The photos, the young parties, the smiling faces, they told a story where I didn't exist. But there was another feeling, too, one I couldn't shake, suspicion. My grandfather had always lived simply. He wasn't rich, not in the way my parents suddenly appeared to be. Yet I couldn't forget the words he once told me. One day you'll have something of your own. Don't be afraid of being left behind. What had he meant? Was there something he'd left for me that I didn't know about? I pushed the thought aside at first, afraid of sounding paranoid, but the more I watched my family flaunt their riches, the more that question echoed inside me. And though I didn't know it yet, the answer to that question would unravel everything. Holidays used to mean something when I was younger. Even if I often felt like the odd one out, there was still a sense of togetherness. Thanksgiving dinners filled with chatter, Christmas mornings with gifts under the tree, birthdays where at least everyone gathered around the same table. But after my family moved to Miami, those moments vanished. What once felt imperfect but familiar became a hollow routine of me reaching out and them turning me away. Every year I tried. Thanksgiving, Christmas, even Easter, I'd call or text, inviting them back to Sacramento. Sometimes my mother would pick up, her voice soft but dismissive. "Oh, Jacob, we're just so busy this year. Maybe next time." Other times, there was no answer at all. Luke didn't even bother with excuses. My messages to him always ended in silence. A cold notification that he'd seen what I wrote, but chose not to respond. Told myself not to expect much, but when the holidays arrived, hope always crept back in. I'd set the table anyway, I'd cook enough food for more than one person, and every time, I'd sit there staring at the empty chairs, waiting for footsteps that never came. One Christmas stands out in particular. I sat at the old wooden table with a modest plate of turkey, a glass of cheap wine beside me. I scrolled through my phone, pretending not to care. But there it was again. My parents and Luke, smiling in front of a massive Christmas tree in their mansion. Plates piled with gourmet food, their arms around people I didn't recognize, their faces glowing as if the world was perfect. I stared at the photo for a long time. Not a mention of me, not a single call. It was as though I didn't exist. The loneliness didn't come like a sudden storm. It crept in slowly, year by year, like water leaking through the roof of an old house, until everything inside begins to rot. I tried to ignore it, to bury myself in work, to tell myself I was fine. But the truth was, those nights cut deeper than I ever admitted. I sent them gifts every year. Small, thoughtful things. A scarf I knitted for my mom, a book I thought my dad would like, a leather wallet for Luke. But no one thanked me. No one even mentioned them. I couldn't help but wonder if they went straight into some forgotten corner of their mansion, unopened and unnoticed. More and more I felt like a shadow, someone they'd erased from their story. I still loved them, still hoped they'd one day remember me. But with each unanswered call, with each holiday spent alone, I began to realize something I didn't want it to face. Maybe I wasn't part of their family anymore. The year I turned 30, Christmas felt heavier than ever. By then, I had almost stopped expecting anything from my family. I still made a small dinner, turkey, mashed potatoes, and a bottle of cheap wine from the corner store. But I knew no one would show up. The old house was silent except for the faint sound of Christmas songs playing from my dusty speaker. I tried to create some sense of celebration with a little tree in the corner, its colored lights blinking weakly. But instead of joy, it only made the emptiness sharper. I sat at the table, staring at the 3 empty chairs, pretending not to care. I scrolled through social media and, like every other year, saw my family celebrating without me. My mother in her silk dress, my father holding a glass of champagne, Luke laughing with strangers. Their smiles looked brighter, their lives fuller. And there was no sign they even remembered me. Not a call, not a message, not even a casual Merry Christmas. I turned off my phone, fighting back the bitterness in my chest. I stepped outside onto the porch where my grandfather and I used to sit together. Their December air was sharp, and I pulled my jacket tighter. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "I wish you were here, Grandpa." I could almost hear his voice again, reminding me that integrity mattered more than appearances. That's when the doorbell rang. I froze, startled by the sound. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Who would come at this hour on Christmas night when I wasn't expecting anyone? My heart quickened as I walked toward the door. Through the small glass panel, I saw a man in a postal uniform holding a pale yellow envelope. "Jacob Blake?" he asked when I opened the door, his voice flat and professional. "Yes, that's me," I said, confused. "This is for you. Please sign here." I quickly scribbled my name, took the envelope, and thanked him. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. I stood there in the hallway holding the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Something about it felt different, significant. When I looked closer, my breath caught in my throat. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, slanted, a little shaky, but careful. My grandfather's. "To Jacob Blake," it read. "To be opened on the Christmas of your 30th year." My chest tightened. My grandfather had been gone for 5 years. How could a letter from him arrive now, on this very night? I sat down on the sofa, the envelope trembling in my hands. Slowly, carefully, I tore it open. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it, and as I began to read, I could almost hear his voice echoing in my ears. "Dear Jacob," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you're 30 years old, and I hope you're still the same honest man I've always been proud of. I know life can be tough, and family doesn't always turn out the way you hope, but I want you to know you're never truly abandoned. I've left something for you, a trust fund, enough for you to build the life you want in your own way. Go to my lawyer James Carter at 245 Main Street in Sacramento. He'll guide you through claiming it. This is rightfully yours, Jacob. Don't let anyone take it from you. I love you always, Grandpa." I read the letter again and again, my heart pounding harder each time. A trust fund. My grandfather had never mentioned money, not once. He lived simply, almost frugally. I had always thought he left behind nothing more than this old house and memories. Yet here it was in black ink, a promise, written years before his death. A wave of hope surged through me, quickly followed by a cold, gnawing suspicion. Could this explain my family's sudden wealth after his passing? Had they known about this all along? I looked at the photo of my grandfather hanging on the wall, his kind eyes seeming to meet mine. His words at the end of the letter burned into me. "Don't let anyone take it from you." For the first time in years, I felt something other than loneliness on Christmas night. I felt purpose. I knew I couldn't ignore this. Tomorrow, I would go to James Carter's office. I needed answers. The morning after Christmas, I woke up with my grandfather's letter lying on the nightstand beside me. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every line, every word. A trust fund, money he had kept secret from everyone, meant for me. My heart carried a mix of hope and dread. I dressed in a simple shirt, tucked the letter safely into my pocket, and drove downtown to Main Street. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly the whole way. I didn't know what to expect, but I clung to my grandfather's words. "This is rightfully yours. Don't let anyone take it from you." The law office of James Carter looked polished and professional, the kind of place my parents would have admired. A sleek glass door, brass letters gleaming with his name, and expensive furniture in the lobby. The receptionist welcomed me with a smile and led me to his office. Inside, Carter himself sat behind a large mahogany desk, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and an expression as flat as stone. He shook my hand, but his grip was cold. "I'm Jacob Blake," I said nervously, pulling the letter from my pocket. "My grandfather, William Blake, wrote this before he died. He said I should come to you about a trust fund." Carter's eyes flicked over the letter. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow of recognition. But then his face hardened. He set the paper down and leaned back in his chair. "I'm afraid there's no trust fund in your name, Jacob," he said evenly. "I don't know your grandfather, and I have no record of such an account." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "That's impossible," I whispered. "He mentioned you by name. He said you'd help me. Perhaps it's a mistake. Or maybe—" Carter offered a faint, dismissive smile. "Bob? A prank, eh? Either way, I can't help you." I walked out of his office in a daze, clutching the letter like it was the only thing tethering me to the truth. I wanted to believe him, but deep inside I knew something wasn't right. Carter's eyes had avoided mine when he spoke, and the way he brushed off my grandfather's words made my stomach twist. Back in my car, I stared at the photograph of my grandfather on my phone. He had never lied to me, never exaggerated or made empty promises. If he said there was a trust fund, then it had to exist, which meant someone was hiding it. The suspicion that had been quietly gnawing at me suddenly roared to life. My parents, Luke. Their sudden wealth right after my grandfather's death. The expensive mansion, the cars, the parties. Could it really be connected? I needed proof. This next day, I went to the small bank branch where my grandfather had always done his business. The teller, Asha, a kind woman named Sarah, listened carefully as I explained. I showed her the letter, hoping it might carry enough weight to open some door. She looked hesitant, but promised to check the archives. Minutes later, she returned with a thin file. I can't show you everything without proper authorization," she said cautiously. "But I can confirm this. There was a trust fund established in 2017 under your name, Jacob Blake." My heart leapt. Proof. But her face darkened as she flipped through the file. "The account was emptied shortly after your grandfather's death," she continued softly. "The funds were transferred to an account under the name Martin Blake, my father." "How much?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "I don't have the exact figure," she replied. "But it was substantial, very substantial." I left the bank with my world spinning. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. My family had stolen from me. The wealth they flaunted, the parties, the mansion, all of it had come from what my grandfather left for me. To be certain, I sought out a retired banker who had once worked with my grandfather. His name was Henry, and he remembered the trust clearly. "William wanted it only for you," he told me. "But after his death, someone came with a power of attorney claiming to represent you. I didn't handle it directly, but I heard the lawyer involved was Carter, James Carter. There it was again. Carter's name like a shadow over everything. I refused to let the matter rest. I hired a private investigator, an old acquaintance from my insurance work. 2 weeks later, his report arrived, and it shattered me completely. The trust fund had been worth $3 million. It was drained within 3 months of my grandfather's passing. The transactions bore the signatures of my father, Luke, and Carter himself. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the report, my grandfather's letter beside it. Tears blurred my vision as the betrayal sank in. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had stolen from me everything my grandfather had spent his life building for me, everything he had trusted them to protect. I clutched the letter to my chest, whispering through clenched teeth, "I'm sorry, Grandpa, I let them take it." But even as the pain consumed me, another feeling began to rise. Determination. I wiped my tears, straightened my back, and looked at his photo on the wall. "I'll get it back," I promised, "no matter the cost." The decision didn't come easily, but once it did, there was no turning back. I couldn't stay silent anymore. For years I'd been the quiet one, the outsider, the brother who avoided conflict. But this wasn't about keeping the peace. It was about my grandfather's legacy, about justice, about not letting them erase me from the story of my own life. I booked a flight to Miami with trembling hands. The night before leaving, I spread everything across the kitchen table. My grandfather's letter, the investigator's report, the bank documents, copies of signatures that tied everything together. I packed them carefully into a folder as though I were holding sacred proof. Before I left the house, I whispered to my grandfather's photo, "I'll do right by you. I promise." Miami was a world away from Sacramento. When I pulled up to the mansion I had only seen in their social media posts, it felt like stepping onto another planet. White columns, polished marble steps, tall palm trees swaying in the driveway, Luke's red sports car gleamed like a trophy out front. This wasn't the family home I grew up in. It was a palace built on lies. I rang the bell, my heart pounding against my ribs. A maid opened the gate, eyeing me with curiosity. "I'm Jacob Blake," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to see Martin and Janet Blake." Minutes later, my mother appeared. She looked exactly as she did in the photos. Elegant dress, perfect hair, radiant smile. But when her eyes landed on me, the smile faltered. "Jacob," she said cautiously, "what are you doing here? Why didn't you call first?" "I need to talk," I said firmly. "To you, Dad, and Luke, all of you." My father walked in next, dressed in a tailored suit even at home, his polished demeanor unchanged. Luke followed, Dee lounging against the wall in a designer t-shirt, smirking like I had just interrupted his party. "What's so urgent, Jacob?" Luke sneered. "Did you finally run out of canned soup and need a loan?" I ignored him. I walked into the living room, placed the folder on their glass table, and looked straight at my father. "I know about the trust fund Grandpa left for me, the $3 million. I know it was drained and transferred into your accounts, with Luke's signature and Carter's too." The room fell silent. My mother's face paled. My father stiffened, his jaw tightening. Luke let out a nervous laugh. "You're imagining things," my father said, forcing a chuckle. "A trust fund? That's absurd." I slid the letter across the table. "He wrote this to me. He wanted me to have it. And I have the bank records. I have the investigator's report. Don't lie to me." Luke's laugh cracked. "You think Grandpa wanted you to have that money? Look at you, Jacob. You'd blow it in a week. You live like a pauper. We deserve it more than you." His words stung, but they didn't break me. I turned to my mother, desperate for something, an apology, an explanation, anything. But she only looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I want it back," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "What's mine? If you don't return it, I'll take you to court." My father stood, his face red with fury. "You dare accuse me of stealing? You, a clerk who knows nothing about business? You'll regret this, Jacob. If you go public, we'll disown you. You'll lose everything, not just the money, but your family." I felt my throat tighten, but I forced the words out anyway. "I lost my family a long time ago, the day you chose to abandon me." I gathered my folder, turned, and walked toward the door. My father's voice boomed behind me, but I didn't listen. I stepped into the Miami sunlight, my heart heavy yet lighter than it had been in years. I knew there was no going back. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. Filing the lawsuit was the hardest decision I've ever made. For days I stared at the paperwork Nicole, my new lawyer, had helped me prepare. Each page carried weight, accusations of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and theft. These weren't strangers I was suing. They were my parents, my own brother. I wrestled with guilt, fear, and the tiny voice in my head that whispered I was tearing the family apart. But every time doubt crept in, I looked at my grandfather's letter. His slanted handwriting, the words, "Don't let anyone take it from you." They gave me the strength to sign my name. The case moved faster than I expected. My family hired a team of high-priced Miami attorneys who immediately came out swinging, sending letters filled with threats and demands to drop the suit. They called me ungrateful, accused me of fabrication, even hinted at a countersuit for defamation. Relatives flooded me with texts, urging me to think of the family's reputation. But I stayed quiet, saving my words for the only place they mattered, the courtroom. The first hearing was in August in Sacramento's downtown courthouse. I had never been inside a courtroom before. The polished wooden walls, the rows of stiff seats, the heavy silence. It all pressed down on me like a weight. I sat beside Nicole, my palms sweating, my heart pounding in my chest. Across the aisle sat my parents, Luke, and their attorneys. They looked composed, untouchable, like the wealthy family they had become. But beneath the surface, I thought I saw cracks. Tension in my father's jaw, unease in Luke's forced smirk, the way my mother avoided my eyes. When the judge entered, a stern woman named Margaret Collins, the air seemed to freeze. She struck the gavel, and just like that, the battle began. Their lead attorney, Richard Hayes, was smooth and commanding. He painted me as a bitter son, jealous of his family's success. Jacob Blake is a failed man, he declared. Unable to accept his own shortcomings, he has invented a site, a story of betrayal to tear down the very family that supported him. Each word cut deep, but I sat still, gripping the edge of the table. Nicole had warned me, they will try to break you. Then it was our turn. Nicole rose, calm but sharp, her voice steady as she laid out the foundation of our case. She presented my grandfather's letter first, letting the courtroom see his words in black ink. Then she introduced the bank documents showing the trust fund, the transfer records, the signatures. Piece by piece, she built the wall of truth I had been carrying alone for so long. Our first witness was Henry, the retired banker. His voice trembled with age, but his memory was clear. William Blake established a trust fund of $3 million in his grandson Jacob's name, he testified. After William's death, the funds were withdrawn under questionable circumstances. Hayes tried to discredit him, suggesting his memory was failing, implying confusion. But Henry didn't waver. His quiet certainty carried weight. Then came Emily, the former assistant of James Carter. She stood nervously at the stand, her hands shaking, but her words were powerful. I saw McCarter and Mr. Martin Blake sign the documents transferring the funds, she said. I asked if it was legal, since the trust was in Jacob's name. Carter told me to keep quiet. He said it was family business. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I glanced at my father, whose face was red with tension. Luke's smirk had vanished. My mother sat with her head bowed, clutching a handkerchief. Nicole then presented the crown jewel, a copy of the original trust agreement signed by my grandfather, naming me as the sole beneficiary. Seeing his signature again nearly broke me, but I forced myself to stay composed. This was his voice reaching through time to defend me. The judge questioned my father directly. Mr. Blake, how do you explain these transactions? Where did the money for your mansion and luxury assets come from? My father shifted uncomfortably. From my business ventures, Your Honor, real estate in Vish. Estimates? Do you have documentation to prove that? Judge Collins pressed. He faltered. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but the damage was done. No papers could prove what wasn't true. Then she turned to Luke. You purchased a $200,000 sports car months after your grandfather's death. How did you afford it? Luke opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stared at the floor, his face pale. Each hearing stretched the battle further, dragging into September and October. Their attorneys fought back hard, producing forged documents, calling character witnesses to slander me. They said I was bitter, lazy, unworthy. Some days I left the courthouse feeling like I was losing. But Nicole never faltered. The truth is on our side, she reminded me. They can't bury it forever. The media caught wind of the case. Headlines appeared. Son sues family over stolen inheritance and $1 million betrayal. Some articles sympathized with me. Others painted me as an ungrateful child. Strangers debated my life in online forums while I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. But in the courtroom, the truth grew stronger. Every document, every witness, every faltering answer from my father and brother stripped away the lies they had built their lives upon. By late October, we had presented everything. The letter, the bank transfers, the trust agreement, witnesses who confirmed the fraud. Nicole's closing argument was simple, but it pierced through the noise. This isn't just about money. It's about a man's last wish for his grandson, and the betrayal of that trust. Jacob Blake deserves what was left for him, not stolen by those who should have protected him. When she sat down, she squeezed my shoulder. No matter how they spin it, Jacob, the evidence is undeniable. Judge Collins looked at both sides, her expression unreadable. Blee? I will deliver my ruling next month, she said firmly. But let me be clear, this case is not only about financial matters. It is about trust, responsibility, and the moral obligations of family. The gavel struck, and the room emptied. I walked out into the cold October air, my body heavy with exhaustion, but my heart burning with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, I believed justice might be possible. November arrived with sharp winds and gray skies. The courthouse felt colder that morning, its tall windows letting in a pale light that seemed to wash over everything. I sat at the plaintiff's table, clutching my grandfather's letter like a lifeline. Nicole leaned toward me and whispered, "Whatever happens today, remember, you've done everything you could. You honored him." I nodded, though my stomach churned with nerves. Across the aisle, my family looked like shadows of their former selves. My mother, who once flaunted silk dresses and diamond earrings, wore a plain sweater, her eyes swollen from crying. My father sat rigid, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Luke fidgeted in his seat, his usual smugness stripped away, his face pale and drawn. When Judge Collins entered, the room fell silent. She sat down, her gaze sweeping across both sides before she began to read her ruling. After thoroughly reviewing, "All evidence and testimony presented," she said, her voice resonant and unwavering, "this court finds that the $3 million trust fund established by William Blake rightfully belongs to its sole beneficiary, Jacob Blake." The words hit me like a thunderclap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and I felt the weight of years, of loneliness, of betrayal, of being invisible, crash down, and then lift all at once. Nicole squeezed my hand, but I kept my eyes locked on the judge. "Furthermore," Judge Collins continued, "Martin Blake, Janet Blake, and Luke Blake are ordered to repay the full amount, along with penalties for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. James Carter, the attorney involved in the unauthorized transfer, will be referred for disciplinary action, including potential disbarment." The gavel struck. The case was over. Behind me, I heard my mother sob quietly. My father stared straight ahead, his face pale and hard as stone. Luke buried his face in his hands. I didn't look at them, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't. The pain of knowing my own family had done this to me was still too raw. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, firing questions about betrayal, justice, and money. I said nothing. Nicole shielded me as best she could, guiding me past the cameras. "Let's go," she said softly. "You don't owe them your words." When we stepped into the crisp November air, she turned to me with a smile. "You did it, Jacob. Your grandfather would be proud." I nodded slowly. We won, but it doesn't feel like victory. And it didn't. Yes, the law had sided with me. Yes, justice had been served. But I had lost something far greater along the way. The hope of ever having a family again. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was brutal. The Miami mansion was foreclosed to repay the judgment. My parents' social media accounts went silent. The luxury cars were repossessed, the extravagant lifestyle dismantled piece by piece. James Carter had his law license revoked, his face plastered in the newspapers under the headline, "Sacramento Lawyer Disbarred for Trust Fund Fraud." One evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice trembled. "Jacob, I didn't know it would go this far. I just wanted us to have a better life. Please, can you forgive me?" I sat in silence, gripping the phone. Part of me wanted to say yes to let the wound close. But the betrayal was still too deep, the scar too fresh. "Mom," I finally said, my voice quiet, "I only ever wanted what Grandpa Bull EFT for me. I didn't want to destroy the family. But you chose this path, not me." Then I hung up, tears sliding down my cheeks. Justice had been served, but reconciliation, that felt impossible. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible anymore. But the cost of being seen was losing the people I had once loved most. When the $3 million was finally transferred to my account, I didn't feel the thrill I had once imagined. There were no cheers, no celebrations. I sat at the same old kitchen table where I had eaten so many dinners alone, staring at the numbers on the screen. It wasn't joy that filled me, but a heavy silence. I thought of my grandfather and the life he had lived. He never cared about money for its own sake. He valued honesty, integrity, and peace of mind. I knew he wouldn't want me to waste this chance trying to imitate the life my parents and Luke had chased. He would want me to use it in a way that stayed true to who I was, so I made a choice. I didn't buy a mansion in Miami or a flashy car. Instead, I started with the old house, the house that had carried my childhood, my grandfather's voice, and the painful years of being forgotten. I replaced the roof, repainted the walls, and polished the wooden floors until they shone again. The garden, once overrun with weeds, I turned into a vegetable patch. Slowly, the house became more than just a place of memories. It became a home I was proud of. With part of the money, I opened a small woodworking shop in Sacramento, honoring the craft my grandfather once loved. The smell of fresh cut wood, the feel of shaping something with my hands. It brought me a peace I hadn't known in years. Customers came for shelves, chairs, little custom pieces. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was mine. The rest I invested carefully, not for extravagance, but for stability. I wanted security, the kind that would let me live simply without fear of losing it all. For once, I could breathe without the weight of constant worry. But money wasn't the most valuable thing I gained. It was the clarity. For years, I had tried to chase the love of a family that had already abandoned me. I had begged for scraps of attention, hoping they'd let me back into their world. In the end, I realized I didn't need to belong to their world. I had my own. One winter evening, snow began to fall softly outside. I rehung my grandfather's photo on the living room wall. The frame was old, but his eyes seemed to shine as brightly as ever. I touched the glass and whispered, "I protected your legacy, Grandpa. I did it." Then I poured myself a glass of cheap wine, the kind he always said tasted real, and sat by the window watching the snowflakes drift under the streetlights. The house creaked the way it always had, carrying the same scent of pine, but for the first time in years I felt a sense of peace. I no longer had a family in the conventional sense. My parents and Luke were strangers to me now, their voices distant echoes of a life I once tried to hold on to, but I still had my grandfather. Not in flesh and blood, but in his lessons, his letter, and the quiet dignity he left behind. The world outside kept turning. The press eventually moved on. My family would find their own way to rebuild, though never in the same glittering fashion they once flaunted. But me, I stayed here, in the old house, living the life he had wanted for me. Simple, honest, real. And every time I look at his photo, I know he's smiling.